Despite speculation that Israel is advancing its plan to deport African asylum seeker, Israel's High Court has now ruled that the deportation plan just won't stand up to legal challenges. The state has decided to freeze all deportations, at least for now, and ILTV's Aaron Porras is here with more on this story. Now, Aaron, why won't the deportation stand in court, and what is the latest since this freeze has been announced?
So basically, the court says that this won't stand up to legal challenges because Israel cannot guarantee the safety of these asylum seekers after they've been deported to these third-party countries. And furthermore, Israel basically said that they're still planning on starting the deportations after reworking their plan both internally and with the international community, but they're planning on resuming deportations as soon as April 1st at a rate of about 600 per month.
Now, this is interesting because this comes just 2 days after the Holot detention center was closed, where many of these asylum seekers were held. ILTV's Brett Allen Smith is here with the update on this. And Brett, what does it mean now that Holot is officially being closed?
Well, as you said, this falls right into place with the government scheduled to start those deportations. Now, closing Holot essentially exploits a kind of loophole in the law which says that the state cannot forcibly deport asylum seekers without giving them an alternative. Holot was kind of that alternative up until now, so by closing it, it eliminates the choice, and by that logic makes deportation a legal option. Again, this is by their logic.
Holot was only opened a few years ago in response to this situation, but I do know that at least a quarter of all African asylum seekers in Israel have spent at least some time there at some point, and it's essentially an open-air prison, right?
Right. Well, originally it was supposed to be kind of like a holding center while the government reviewed their request for refugee status. But asylum seekers actually couldn't legally file those requests for many years, and even now, many years later, the vast majority of requests remain unanswered. I mean, this case is still being heard today in the courts. Just yesterday, one of the presiding judges confessed how frustrated he was that the state couldn't really explain those delays. So imagine being one of these asylum seekers waiting years for an answer, or...
Which again will point out that on one hand, the majority are Christians from Eritrea and Sudan who say they fled genocide for a better life in Israel. But on the other hand, the government says they're essentially only here to get jobs, which is why for now only single men of working age are being targeted for deportation. I mean, that's the heart of the debate that we typically hear here, right?
Sure. I mean, a big court decision last week kind of hurts the government's argument there, I will say, because a judge just ruled that like in practically every other country, Israel has to recognize now that Eritreans who fled their country because of the army draft, they do qualify as refugees. And for the average man in Eritrea, you're conscripted into what many say is a slave army as soon as you hit 18 years old, many of them for the rest of their lives.
Does the closing of Holot mean we're headed towards a showdown then when that April 1st deadline actually begins, the deportations?
Right. Well, it's kind of hard to say, but that's kind of what many in this community are really bracing for. And then we're seeing protests pretty regularly now on a daily basis against those deportations, kind of more and more public support starting to rally behind the refugee cause. And remember, Israel is still in talks with the UN to avoid what could be a very disastrous PR nightmare if they choose to move ahead with this. And that's why, everyone from doctors to American diplomats, even Holocaust survivors here have urged government not to do this and to stop the deportations.
All right, Brett. Well, thanks for joining us with the update.
Sure.
And many saw this as a sign of an advancement of this, deportation plan. So what can asylum seekers expect right now?
So for now, there are a few things that we know. The first is that women and children, asylum seekers, are still not targeted for deportation. Second, the state will continue to hold deportation hearings, and anyone with an open case file is also safe for deportations, pending the conclusion of that case. Third, asylum seekers already in custody of the state are not going to be released, and those who refuse deportation will be subject to indefinite imprisonment in Saronim prison.
Now, you mentioned something about working with the international community. Obviously, the UN has been speaking to Israel about different plans. Canada has been speaking to Israel. How is all that going?
So, there are approximately 38,000 asylum seekers right now living in Israel, 72% of which are Eritrean and 20% are Sudanese. Both of these populations are considered refugees across the world. So right now, the UNHRC is working with the international community to maybe absorb some of these asylum seekers, provided that Israel absorb the rest.
Right. And finally, in regards to what's happening here internally, how are Israelis responding to this? We saw a lot of protests against the deportation.
Yeah, it's very divisive. In general, most activists and outspoken people are blasting the deportations overall, especially actually from Holocaust survivors, which is very interesting. And what's even more interesting is that there's about 1,000 families who have signed up for a program to illegally house a lot of these asylum seekers.
Which we've covered several
exactly,
times.
which we've covered several times, and that's,
Well,
it's
this
civil
is good
disobedience,
news for now. So obviously we're going to wait and see what happens.
and report it as it comes out.
All right.